What's that? Big video today? Yeah, that means we got a sponsor for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Our friends over at Raycon is selling a good old premium quality earbud, ladies and gentlemen. But you know what? When I make videos like this, it requires copious amounts of editing. Some would say multiple all-nighters. And ladies and gentlemen, you should never edit in silence, which is why I use Raycons to listen to good old-fashioned chill wave music, some vapor wave, some zen music, if you will, because no one should edit in complete blistering silence. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you do edit for 32 hours straight, which no one should edit for 32 hours straight, that's a medical problem, then the Raycon battery should last that long. Raycons also come with a good old set of gel tips, and unlike other brands, they definitely stick in your ears. Trust me on that one. They also start at half the price of other premium audio brands, and they sound just as good. And hey, if you give it a try and you don't like it, trust me, Raycon's got a 45-day happiness guarantee. So ladies and gentlemen, go to buyraycon.com/someordinarygamers for 15% off your next order. That said, let's go to the video. Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar. Today I'm looking at Cyberpunk again, and why would I be doing that? Ladies and gentlemen, I am looking at the curious case of the downgrading of Cyberpunk. Now, I've been waiting for this game since January 2013, and that's when Cyberpunk 2077's official YouTube channel first published their famous teaser trailer. Now, this was a CGI trailer, and at the end they said, coming when it's ready. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, people can meme on it now, but back in the day, this stuff blew my mind. An open-world Cyberpunk game. As somebody that's a fan of the Cyberpunk universe, I was absolutely excited to see one of my favorite future environments represented in an open-world game made by people who knew what they were doing, and still know what they're doing. Now, back in the day, they had a website, the original Cyberpunk 2077 webpage that you can go to with the Wayback Machine, and while it's early in its conception, this game was basically revealed in its pre-planning stages. Now, of course, they did have a blog post that I kind of found funny, which shows some of the inspirations I think Cyberpunk 2077 had in terms of game design beyond the pen and paper RPG it's based off of. Now, there's this one sort of blog post they do where they have sort of a chef cookbook for a good Cyberpunk game, and of course, the chef is talking about cool implants, Cyberpunk fonts, punk glasses, and super cyber hands. Now, of course, I don't think that necessarily makes a good Cyberpunk game, but they did have a list of titles. One of them was Deus Ex. Now, Deus Ex is basically the granddaddy of Cyberpunk games. If you haven't played it, you definitely should. It's a very old title, but it's basically built upon freedom of choice and basically creating an absolutely immersive world. You don't have an open world environment, you basically have open hub worlds. Now, granted, these are smaller in size than anything Cyberpunk 2077 throws, but I would argue that the worlds provided in Deus Ex have more density and world building attached to them than something from Cyberpunk 2077. They also mentioned something I've never heard of called Tom Clancy's Ruthless.com, which was sort of this turn-based RPG set in a cyberpunk universe. They also mentioned Blacklight Retribution, which is a free-to-play game that was basically really popular on the PS4 and Xbox One's launch cycle as a free-to-play download cyberpunk-themed title. They also mentioned I Divine Cybermancy, which is also a cyberpunk game, kind of like Deus Ex, but definitely got more of an indie vibe. And then they mentioned Beneath a Steel Sky, which is sort of a fan favorite. I've personally never stuck too hard into playing it, but yeah, they definitely had a list of interesting cyberpunk titles to base themselves off of. How much of those inspirations melded into the final product? Let's go find out. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Cyberpunk has gone through a billion patches at this point. Bit of a hyperbole. It's been through some patches. CD Projekt Red is putting in a lot of tender love and care into making sure this game actually works. Now, since the release of the most recent patch 2 weeks ago, 1.3, I decided I want to look into it. So recently I played through some more of Cyberpunk and I noticed the game looks a little flatter than I remember last time. In fact, Night City might be going through another lockdown, if you will. So to understand, ladies and gentlemen, I put almost 200 hours of my life into this game, and between the PC version and the PS4 version, which I play on a PS5, I have gotten considerably mixed results between either system. Now, I might be wondering, Muta, if you've been so critical of the game in the last, basically almost the year it's been out, Why are you still putting 200 hours into it? I want to start this off really positively and say that I liked my time with Cyberpunk. I think it's okay to be critical of any title, especially one that if you have a personal connection, which in this case I did. Remember, I was waiting years for this game to come out. And, you know, honestly, if I go back in time and I go to the E3 40-minute presentation that they had, you know, not a lot of that was a total downgrade. For instance, this one shot where you overlook Night City, if you look in the final build at the same time and match it up, it actually does look like CD Projekt Red put their effort into designing a world, at least visually. But I think where things falter is when you look at this initial shot of walking down from your safe house and noticing this massive crowd. Now, when I saw this back in the day, I was blown away. I was like, this is a really, really immersive looking world. Unfortunately, I also began to think what this game would run like on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, systems it was advertised for. So I got this from Yongya as a source over here. Basically, this is a Discord conversation apparently of the actual community management, and you can see the spec sheet for that E3 reveal was an i7-8700K at 3.7 gigahertz, around 32 gigabytes of memory, and a GTX 1080 Ti, which back then was pretty much top of the line. So, if that's what their E3 presentation was based off, I was a bit worried by how it would scale to a console like the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4 that were far inferior in technical output. I really was questioning if this game was going to run properly on those systems. And despite CD Projekt Red basically saying that they were surprised the game was even running, which I guess running in that definition is the game launched and who cares if it's 15-20 frames per second, at least it's running. I really was worried. Now, of course, the day when the game launched came and we were all obviously blown away by how different it really was in comparison to whatever CD Projekt Red was shilling out. Now, to understand, despite all of those downgrades and the fact that Cyberpunk launched without a lot of features that open world games themselves should basically default anyways, I actually quite enjoyed the narrative for the game. I think despite the narrative not being branching, I actually enjoyed the story for what it was. I enjoyed the world for what it was. My initial expectation for this game was, as long as it's kind of on the same path as Deus Ex, I can tolerate it. Now, again, I was let down, despite having lower expectations. I really wasn't trying to hype myself up. This also begins a line of questioning that I think you can ask, is will Cyberpunk ever reach the state that it's in? To understand before we go into it, this is not a No Man's Sky situation. No Man's Sky's benefit is that you can basically mod whatever you want to a game that by definition is always open-ended. In No Man's Sky, you create a save file and you spawn on top of a random planet with a random ship, and you take off and explore a random procedurally generated galaxy. Now, of course, over time, developers can add features and add story paths to a game that's open-ended in design. In Cyberpunk's case, yes, you can add law enforcement systems and make them better. You can add traffic AI and make it better. You can add open world features and make the game better. What you can't make better are plot elements that are baked into the game by design. That would require a rewrite and a redo of the game, and basically would be a Cyberpunk remake versus a Cyberpunk, that we initially should have gotten. And in that regard, that's where I kind of stand. Do I enjoy the game for what it is? Absolutely. But I think my connection to the game and my analysis of it basically will show you that people who are the most invested in a title usually will end up being the most critical for it. I don't really care about many other games. I care about Cyberpunk and a few others. This and No Man's Sky are key examples of games that I personally was excited for, and games that have taken different avenues of their post-launch path. Now, to understand where this downgrading controversy begins, we have to understand that Cyberpunk on PC and the consoles is an entirely different experience. Now, where the lines become blurred is lately, because of every single patch, the game is being severely optimized. And by optimized, certain graphical features are actually being toned down, if not outright removed. Now, this would be fine if you're looking at it from a console perspective, right? The PS4 version and the base Xbox One version need the most optimizations possible to get the game running up to at least 30 frames per second. Now, when I talk about something like memory management, I'm going to show you this infamous sort of shot of Cyberpunk. A lot of people show this to kind of drag on the game, and the reality of it is this is sort of how the game is managing traffic at a distance. So if you're looking at it, this is traffic coming in from the Badlands, and in some cases you can actually see that traffic comes in from the other roads and disappears very briefly. This is the game trying to give the illusion of traffic. Now, in some cases, the closer some of these vehicles get, some may actually become real manifestations of actual cars. Now, if you look at this shot of Grand Theft Auto 5, leaving Michael's house, I recorded this on the PlayStation 4, just to really show you how consoles handle the memory management. As soon as I leave Michael's house, you can actually see that in the distance towards Rockford Plaza, there's actually 3 vehicles that just spawn. Now, this is the game giving the illusion of traffic. This is the game actually spawning in traffic. Now, luckily, we caught the game right here doing this. Otherwise, Grand Theft Auto can be very intelligent in managing its traffic. Even when going at high speeds, the game will constantly render in new vehicles to obstruct your path, and if you ever notice around in the actual game world, there may be slightly less NPCs when you're ripping through the city. It's not that the game doesn't want to render NPCs, it's really just a manifestation of you have a very limited budget on these gaming devices, so you better take advantage of all of it. And in Rockstar's case, they focused more on giving you massive traffic than maybe a few NPCs that somebody could avoid in the middle of a high-speed chase or pursuit. That doesn't mean when you get on foot that the game doesn't start spawning in different levels of NPCs. See, the way that world or memory management happens in these games is very, very complicated, and it definitely differs from developer to developer. Even on the PC version of GTA 5, you can take these safeguards off by increasing the population density and variety to an utmost degree. You can do the same thing on Cyberpunk 2077. And of course, the idea is, on the PC, if you don't have any memory limitations, take the safeguards off. But even in this case, you can see that in a lot of situations, the game is very intelligent in managing memory. For instance, Grand Theft Auto 5, again on the PC, if you go to the top of any Maze Bank tower at night, you'll probably notice that, hey, there's actual traffic in the city. Look at those dots whirring by. Well, it's not that the game is rendering any traffic. If you actually zoom in with a sniper scope, the game will then load in traffic once it becomes available in your viewport. And of course, you can understand that when you're playing a video game, in order to render a living, breathing open world, you have to be very smart in how you present it, because you only have a limited budget and CPU processing power to work with. So really, you're rendering in your immediate area, and with intelligent culling, you have to realize that each developer is really putting their all in rendering a very, very thorough representation of the world they want. Now again, if you move to games like Spider-Man on the PlayStation 5, which has more resources available than GTA 5 or Cyberpunk currently on the PlayStation 5.
Now, when I think of an immersive open world game, I think of something like Spider-Man, with a ton of traffic and pedestrians littering the world and bringing a sort of lived-in factor. When I look at something like Cyberpunk, you can see it trying to fight memory, or memory management by despawning NPCs right in front of you, so whatever system it's using is incredibly aggressive. Again, I don't want to rag on Cyberpunk with this exact shot over and over and over again, but Cyberpunk sort of handles it in the worst ways. Now, in certain cases, when I was playing on the 1.0 version of the game, driving through Corpo Plaza, which by all effects is the downtown of Night City, you'll actually notice that the game does render in traffic. But because the game is rendering all this traffic, sometimes cars just randomly spawn in and disappear in front of you. It's a goddamn mess. Now, of course, there's a difference between having this traffic and sort of erratically moving in and out of memory, and then all the way up to patch 1.3 where the traffic all but seemingly disappears. Now again, I don't know if this is all necessarily a bug, but this has been happening to me as I patched the game up. It seems like CD Projekt Red's idea of memory optimizations is basically limiting traffic and pedestrian stuff as you're zipping through the city. But this becomes a problem because Night City shouldn't be this empty. Now, of course, you can actually bypass a lot of this by standing in one place for a couple minutes and hopefully getting traffic rolling in and NPCs. You can progress this by actually going to the menu, changing the time, and suddenly the NPCs will spawn in. In 1.0 versions of the game, the moment moment you stopped a car, sometimes textures would load in. And then as soon as you got out of a car, NPCs would just huddle in all around you. So honestly, 1.0 had a great idea of like, hey, this is a lively city at the cost of, you know, your CPU performance and the memory pool of the actual PlayStation or Xbox One base being absolutely shuttered. But of course, patch 1.3 comes across, which definitely did improve the performance of these systems at the cost of a lively city. Now, of course, at this point, the question needs to be asked, when is an open world game still an open world game? To be honest with you, if I'm going to be playing in a city as dense as Night City in this case, I need to have traffic and I need to have a ton of NPCs constantly roaming around me. I mean, the population of Night City alone almost matches that of New York City. The game better feel like it. At this point, you might as well just make a game that is Deus Ex in nature. A game that has a smaller open world, if that, a district, if you will. Yeah, there's not moving cars, but at least the world feels lived in and in its own way alive. I'd honestly prefer games like Yakuza or Judgment, where you don't have a massive open world. The game is just rendering a dense district. And somehow that feels more lively and immersive than, unfortunately, the patched versions of Cyberpunk 2077. At the core, I don't mind this game. I quite like it, but the more these downgrades and memory concessions have to happen, you have to imagine if you're actually even getting the game that was shipped on launch sometimes. Now, where it gets kind of weird is some of these optimizations have been bleeding into the PC version of the game. Now, the PC version, up until the latest patch, in fact, I'll show you footage right now, it runs absolutely brilliantly. I'm running the game at maximum settings, full ray tracing, everything included. And so far, I'm not disappointed. The game runs about as well as I can expect it. But a few Redditors were key to notice that some of the game's visuals definitely have been cut. For instance, this person started posting around how the SSR implementation was actually being diminished. For those of you who don't know what SSR is, it's a way that we do reflections in video games. It's called screen space reflection. So the way that this works is, as long as something is in the screen, it should be reflected onto any reflective surface the game has. The moment something disappears from the screen, that reflection disappears too. A great way to test this out for yourself is look at something and look at how it's reflecting onto anything below. It could be the ground, could be whatever. And then slowly start to pan the camera away from whatever the reflecting object is, or sorry, not the reflecting object, but whatever is causing the reflection, and soon you'll discover on the reflecting object, it actually disappears entirely. In fact, in Cyberpunk's case, it's caked in screen space reflections. This is how Cyberpunk achieves that sort of Blade Runner-ish look that is almost iconic with the game. Now, SSR is an incredibly expensive technique, so the fact that it was used at all to this extent on the base PS4 and Xbox One blew me away. But in order to hit 30 frames per second, that's basically been cut. Now, to understand, I've been playing the game on PS5. Now, right now, if you play Cyberpunk on the consoles, it is in fact just the base console experience no matter what you play. So if you're playing it on the PS5, you are basically playing the PS4/PS4 Pro version. If you're playing the Xbox Series X version or S, I believe you're actually playing the Xbox One X version, but Microsoft's a little better. I think CD Projekt Red can cater for each individual device. If you're just on PlayStation like I am, you're basically playing the PS4 version on a PS5, except it runs at 60 frames. Now that means not only are you losing some of these reflections, but you are in fact also losing basically the entire fucking traffic system of the game. Now, I've done a few pieces of testing myself, and I found out that, my god, Night City is actually pretty dead. So this is footage from the Center Corpo Plaza, which is basically downtown Night City, and as you can see, I'm driving around the world, and there's almost nobody in the area. There's almost no life at all. And I've posted this clip onto Twitter, and I got a bunch of responses saying, "Whoa, this game is dog water." And ever since I posted that clip too, there's been some discourse that have said that it's a 12-year-old sort of critique. You know, it's just some gamer stupid critique. This isn't a healthy critique to have. I was just really posting a clip for 30 seconds showcasing how this city was dead, but I guess I'll explain it better. You know, in the end of the day, all right, the game, to hit 30 frames per second, CD Projekt Red has effectively been optimizing the console version of the game. Now, before anybody in the comment section says, "But Muda, just play it on your PC."
Look, I'm one of those individuals that wants to have an equal experience for almost everyone. I get it. The PC users are gonna get the better experience. My first playthrough was on the PC, and you know what? That's fine and dandy. But I believe if you're gonna pay $60 for a game across the board, everyone should get at least somewhat of a comparable experience. Look, I get it. Console players aren't going to get the ray tracing effects and the 4K and the 120 frames per second. But taking away the entire facets of a city makes no fucking sense to me. Ladies and gentlemen, that clip I posted was also criticized for why are gamers complaining about traffic? Isn't that something you don't want? Look, I'm not talking about LA bumper to bumper traffic, but I'm also not talking about lockdown in a video game. To understand what's actually gone on here, again, to hit the 30 frames, they've basically been severely optimizing everything. Now, I tried to really understand how much of it was this really being downgraded. So, because I own the physical disc for the game, I ended up getting the game, I deleted it off my PlayStation 5, and I disconnected the internet and I installed Cyberpunk 1.0, the release version on the disc, and played that. Now, to understand, there are some differences you can see right off the bat. It's blurry, there's a weird checkerboarding effect every time you drive, and you can see the literal trail of your car. There's an interesting situation where the game doesn't hit 60 frames because you need a patch in order for the PS5 to double its frame rate. So it's a 30 frame game with all of the bugs imaginable. Is it an experience that you can play all the way through to the end? Absolutely. I finished half of the game unpatched, and yes, it is buggy. Very buggy. Some of the quests break on you. The game crashes harder than somebody, Mr. Magoo driving, okay? The game is bad. The game is unstable. But you can play the game. But something interesting I noticed on 1.0 footage for the PlayStation 4 version, there was traffic at Corpo Plaza. So I tried to match the times the best that I could, because Cyberpunk is one of those games where the population and the traffic are reflective of the locations you go into. For example, in the suburbs of Santo Domingo, you'll probably find out that there's not that many cars that drive around at 2 in the morning. There are probably a few cars that are driving around at noon that day. But in Corpo Plaza, you'll notice that no matter what time on the updated version, 1.3, it's mostly dead. In fact, all of Night City is effectively dead when you drive through it. Now, in the original version of the game, this is not something that I necessarily see. Night City has a bustling population. There are cars on the road. But more importantly is you can see right where the PlayStation 4 is trying really desperately to stay, to even operate and run the game. Now, what I mean by that is if you look at some of this footage, you'll see that cars randomly appear on the road, okay? They randomly just show up. I think what I got here is a really great example. So as we're driving down the highway in this is patch 1.0 by the way, you can see that in the distance on the opposite lane, some vehicles are actually going to spawn in. Now pay attention to some of the vehicles that show up right around here. Now as I make a 180 turn, these two vehicles, actually one of them switched. On the right, this one vehicle, which is a Villafort, when I was coming in the lane, it was black. As soon as I turned around, it immediately switched to a beige color. Now from what I understand, as soon as it left the viewport, the screen space, it actually unloaded and may have reloaded. I don't know what's going on here. This is a bug that I've seen in the 1.0 version of the game. So as soon as I turned around, I guess it reloaded into a different color. And this is just an example of aggressive management. It's not just reappearing cars, it's cars that are changing every time you view them once again. For instance, if you go to nightclubs and you just move your camera away from an NPC and right back to them, you'll notice that they're T-posing and they get back into a position. Why? That's because the game is severely loading and unloading characters, NPCs, vehicles, various objects, just to maintain a memory budget. Now, this is the 1.0 version of the game, and obviously, as you can imagine, Cyberpunk is shitting itself trying to even run. So, to counteract this, CD Projekt Red has been patching the fuck out of the game and optimizing it, and basically by optimizations, they're trying to basically lower vehicle count, lower NPC count, at least that's what it appears to be, and in some cases, lowering that reflection that we saw earlier, just to make it hit the 30 frames per second. So here's the patch list for 1.3. As you can see, this is one of the longest patch lists that I've ever seen. There are a lot of issues with the game, and thankfully the engineers at CD Projekt Red are doing everything they can to fix this shit up. According to the screen space reflection in this patch note, improved the screen space reflection effect so it looks less grainy on consoles and on lower visual setting qualities on the PC. Oh yeah? Oh yeah, you're fixing it up? Let's look at it again. Yeah, so this is one user who is showing their experience. So this is pre-patch 1.23 with screen space reflections. As you can see on the ground over here, things are being reflected in the screen space onto the reflective surfaces below. Now on the newest version of the game, whoa! Shit looks pretty dead as far as the reflections go. All of a sudden, it's all but disappeared. Here's one user who's showing 1.23 Psycho SSR. So you can see how it's reflecty and everything and really nice. The iconic cyberpunk look. Yeah, here's the optimized look, basically destroying and reducing as much as they can. Now at this point, look at that. This is the intro cutscene when you're driving with Jackie after the first mission. Yeah, reflective, nice. You can see the green sort of reflecting on the screen space come through. All but gone again. God damn. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is patch notes from version 1.31, which basically just released as I'm editing this video. And from what I've actually seen, apparently this does fix some of the wet surfaces. They actually do detail that they are working on the wet surfaces system. So I guess this might mean certain aspects are fixed. Again, this also requires extensive testing, whether they've changed this on the PC or whether they changed this on the consoles. And then we also have to check what's up with the game's traffic and memory systems as well too. So again, this game is constantly being patched up. If you guys remember way back when they had their big apology moment, CD Projekt Red gave out this roadmap where they were talking about patch 1.2 sometime in 2021, then 1.2, and then finally we're going to get some free DLCs. They gave us free DLCs with this patch, guys. They gave us Emo Johnny, a new car, and some jackets, which, hey, look, I'm not complaining, alright? It's free DLC. They're also going to give you the free next-gen console update, so PS5 and Xbox Series X users do not have to play the last-gen versions with all of these extreme optimizations anymore. In fact, they even updated a little bit, and they're still promising that next-gen console update before 2022. Now, again, if you're going to make a roadmap like this, you should try to follow it the best you can. But with CD Projekt Red, one of the weirdest things is that when they make these fucking roadmaps, as an engineer, I have to realize game development is very complicated. And usually when you modify one function, there's probably going to be 5 or 6 that end up being broken. So honestly, I would just do the No Man's Sky strat and not give a roadmap. Just literally work on the game and release the patches and expansions as they should come. Now, I get that CD Projekt Red has investors like every other AAA studio, and of course they have to make these timelines, but despite the loosest timelines ever given, it's still not accurately being followed through. So at some point, it's instead of setting those expectations up, it's really time to just understand that this game has like 2 years left in the oven to truly bake to perfection. And it's better to just cover all those bases first, then start focusing on rebranding it and re-putting it out on the market, because this game does have to sell again. It does have to relaunch, if you will. You know, guys, one of the biggest lies that I think I've ever seen is this video again. This is straight from their actual channel again, where they're talking about PlayStation gameplay. Again, I keep using PlayStation because that's the version I played. Again, if you're an Xbox player, you might have similar experiences. I hope your experiences are better, to be honest with you, because let's just watch this one real quick. This is apparently what CD Projekt Red considered to be actual PlayStation footage. Yeah, apparently they had this much traffic flowing around, and there's a reason why they're actually driving this slow, in my opinion, and I think it's because they don't want the game to stutter whatsoever. But back in 2012, ladies and gentlemen, CD Projekt Red, this is one of their first announcements to it, okay? So watch this one real quick. This is literally from 2012. So they had Our Promise, mature RPG for mature-up audiences, realistic and brutal, set in a rich, futuristic world, gripping, non-linear... Okay, one mission's non-linear, let's calm down. Filled with life and detailed, advanced RPG mechanics. All right, let's listen to some of this.
To deliver in our Cyberpunk game. And finally, I think it's a really bold statement, but if you don't believe me, play our Witcher games. We promise that we'll deliver a truly outstanding futuristic RPG, setting totally new standard in the genre, both in terms of the gameplay, but also on the tech side. We are using our advanced Red engine, which really works extremely well.
Yeah, they're setting a new standard, huh? So anybody that acts like they never promised anything, you can shut the fuck up right there. This was promised since 2012.
Now, switching back over to GTA 5 for a second, I think it's a good example of what I think makes an open world game a truly open world game. Of course, you can make a billion promises about making an open world title that is more believable than anything that has come so far. But one of the ideas that I always sort of hear about Cyberpunk is that it looks really nice, and the world is far beyond what the PlayStation 4 or any device can render. Now, despite this being PC footage, I'm not modifying the spawn rates or really the density of the vehicles in question. What you see on my modded PC is better, yes of course, than a PlayStation 4. But the PS4 is no slouch. When I look at Los Santos being rendered, I can see a world with traffic, pedestrians, a world that I want to explore. I think when I look at Night City, I open the map screen and all I witness is a level select at this point. Because if the world doesn't feel like it has any life going on in between my drives, then this whole map screen might as well just be a level select. You know, for me, an open world game is not going between level to level. I love Metal Gear Solid 5, but I will gladly say that the game world is frankly just a bunch of smaller, like sort of single player missions that are all scattered across a massive open title. When I look at something like Watch Dogs or GTA, I expect the open world to bite back against me when I start to go beyond what I'm supposed to or allowed to legally do in those worlds. I expect law enforcement systems. I expect open worlds filled with actual teeming life. I want to play in a world that's lived in. So that's really where I look at Cyberpunk in the grand scheme of things. I think when I play a patched version of Cyberpunk on the consoles at least, it basically comes across in the sense that, hey, we had this idea for an open world. We had these systems planned out. But I think mismanagement really came in clutch because what's really happened in this situation, in order to achieve a playable game, we've basically taken out the reasons why we wanted to go to Night City in the first place. And I think that's a real important nail on the head to hit. Now, when CD Projekt Red ended up bringing these games back in, it seems as though the optimizations they hit were primarily to prevent the game from crashing. So when we look at some of the footage earlier, when cars randomly spawn in the version 1.0 version of the game, and when NPCs are randomly spawning in, T-posing every time you look away and back, that's because the game is aggressively trying to manage the memory that it's using. See, even on a PS5 or the Xbox Series X, because these aren't next-gen aware versions of those games, they don't really have access to the higher pools of memory that they offer. They are completely constrained by these last-generation systems. So in order for CD Projekt Red to make them work, instead of trying to render in, it seems, vehicles, they have almost eschewed the living, breathing aspect of Night City. There are less NPCs dramatically. The game literally will stop spawning in actual vehicles and characters just to maintain the 30 frames per second and just to go, which has led me to really understand that at the end of the day, this game has been so severely downgraded that it's not even the game that was initially even sold. You know, to be honest, this is the first time, again, where the PC version of a fucking game and the console version of that same game has absolutely been switched. They've absolutely been like spread to the polar extreme ends. Night City has went from a city that, yeah, it was initially buggy and everything, and it's downgraded, in my opinion, to a place that is basically borderline empty and dead. And to be honest with you, I really don't know the fix that can exist. Look, I want to be positive about it, and I'm sure that this game will actually re-release maybe sometime in the next several months. They'll start printing new discs for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series systems, maybe for the PS4 and Xbox One, but I honestly doubt it at this point. I honestly feel this game might be seeing a cancellation towards that last generation of system. And it's kind of a shame. You've been advertised to since the launch of this game's, advertising campaign. And the people who play on those systems have been hurt the hardest. To be real with you, the only way this game can survive is if they cut the fat and primarily make this for the PC and next generation systems. And even then, how much of this game is really going to make a true comeback? I'm kind of skeptical. On really good news, CD Projekt Red is actually hiring some modders that are actually working on the game right now into the company. These modders are probably going to be the best fix for Cyberpunk at this point. Beyond that, I actually hope this game has really solid expansions because, like I said at the beginning of the video, dude, I put 200 hours of my life into this game. There's clearly a good game. Not a great, amazing game by any stretch of the imagination, but a game that's worth coming into. Unfortunately, these downgrades, in my opinion, I'm calling them downgrades because that's how I perceive them, just honestly leave a sour taste in my mouth, alright? The game is clearly not an open world city game at this point. It might as well be a different game than what it once launched. But I guess it's the cost that has to happen for a game to reach 30 frames. Some real Ubisoft, some real Ubisoft level downgrading has to occur for this game to be in the state that it is now, at least playable. That said, ladies and gentlemen, hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.